Today we're going to be replacing the front rotors and brake pads. Truck, put a safety jack underneath it so nothing falls, so you have good support there. Next, take a 22mm socket, take off these little plastic thing here on the outside, all of those things that hold it on. Underneath there you will see the real lug nuts. Those are 23mm. Lug nuts on this truck look like this, and they're 23mm. You'll take them off and you will see this assembly right here. The reason why I'm replacing these rotors is there's a lot of stress cracks due to heat. And you can see one right there, and there's a number of other ones on these rotors. Next, you'll take your 22mm you used on the little plastic hub. You will put it on here, and then you will put an extension through the holes that you see on each one of these. You'll attach it and you'll take off those 8 bolts around there. You can see it coming off right there. So take all of those off, and be careful on your last one because that hub may fall on you. The next thing we're going to do is pry the brake pads away from the rotor here. You want to put on 2 nuts here because this rotor will be very loose as it sits here. The way we're going to pry it out is we're going to find the space between the brake pad and the rotor. You can see this brake pad right here is a little chipped because I already tried to separate it, and you can see the separation right there. To separate it is you stick a screwdriver between the brake pad, which is right here, and the rotor, which is right here. You stick it right down in the middle and you just pry back on it. Got to do it really hard. One thing you may do is take the cap off of your master cylinder where you put your brake fluid. After you've separated the rotor and the brake pad as much as you can, next we'll remove the calipers. To do that, you'll need an 18mm, and you can see the bolt right here that it goes on, and along with the bolt down here that it goes on, and you'll undo those and take it off. When you take the caliper off, be sure not to let it drop because it's big and heavy. You want to maybe have a wire on it and put it maybe up here and then attach it to the rotor so it doesn't drop and break your line right here, which will be another project. Folks, we removed the caliper. I just flipped it up and set it right there. Here's the bolts that came out. Notice that they're greased, so maybe put some grease on them when you put them back in. Now if you wanted to do just a brake job, well, you just take out the brake pads right here and put them in. But if you want to be able to remove the rotor, you're going to have to remove this caliper mount or housing here. And to do that, there are 2 bolts for that. They're on the back side up here. You should be able to see them pretty easy right there. And then of course there's a second one there. You can see it on the bottom right there. One of the tools that you're going to need to get this caliper mount off is a very heavy duty pry bar, one even longer than the one you see there. I'm using an air gun here, still having a hard time getting it off, so make sure you got one of those before you start this job. Okay, I finally got those 2 nuts off. This unit here will lift right off and the brake pads will fall to the ground like so. And to get that off, one of the bolts I had to use this big long tube, square tubing here with a breaker bar, because my air gun here would not take it off. Here's a look at the silicone prior to me putting it on the unit there. Alright folks, here is one of the stainless steel things put on. Notice that I've put on the inside that you can't see a lot of silicone, but also dabbed some on this corner and this corner here. So next thing we're going to do is now put the caliper mount back where it belongs. Note that the bolts on those, I'm using this Loctite. This is required by the manual to lock those things in there, and they need to be cranked way down. Okay folks, now we're going to put on our brake pads, our brand new ones. Notice that I put a little bit of silicone right here to help any sound dampening. I've also put a little grease right here on these parts right here that are going to move, and so we won't have any noise. Hey folks, we got the brake pads in, looking good right there. You can see the grease, you can see the silicone, and that's good. Next, we're going to put the caliper back on with its original bolts, and note that you need to grease these also. when you bring them out, they should have grease on them, and you're going to put more on it when you put it in. There's 2 of them. All right, folks, one thing to pay attention to when you're putting these bolts in, there's this rubber little boot right here. This boot goes inside of the caliper steel right here. So when you slide these bolts in, that boot will prevent dirt and water and rust from getting in these bolts and ruining your caliper. So make sure those boots are set correctly. Okay, folks, we got the whole thing put back together here, looking sweet with the new rotor and the new brake pads. Put some silicone in there to help prevent any squealing that may go on. Now we're going to put this mount back on. We're going to put finger tighten, or just put on by fingers each of the nuts. Then we'll use the ratchet to tighten them down. All right, folks, we got everything put on, and now we're going to put the tire on and call it a day.